Ask Earl Anything. This is the show where your questions make the show, and this is actually my second intro to the show. My first intro I did yesterday, and I completed the show, and I was going to put it out, and I am putting it out on Saturday morning in my normal Hanging with the Hammer time. But what transpired between the time I actually shot the video and found out that Roger Hawkins, the famous Muscle Shoals drummer, who played on a lot of the songs I've been playing the last couple months. When I found that out last night around 8 o'clock, when my wife said, hey, Roger Hawkins died, it kind of got me a little worked up and inside. And I said, you know, I need to come back and do a little bit on Roger Hawkins. A drummer I haven't given enough of how much of an influence he was on my life to you guys. So, with that said, let me talk to you about Roger Hawkins. Now, Roger Hawkins is the drummer from Muscle Shoals, Alabama. He was part of the Swampers and the famous Muscle Shoals rhythm section. A couple of the guys in that rhythm section ended up going and cutting tracks with Aretha Franklin and doing a lot of work for Atlantic Records back in the 60s. And he was the drummer that worked with King Curtis and Aretha Franklin. He eventually went on to work with Paul Simon. He worked with Percy Sledge on A Man Loves a Woman. That's probably his first big hit song was that. And he was like 20 years old when he cut that track. And he would tell you that his influences were the Stax rhythm section, especially Al Jackson Jr. And he would tell you that the funkiest drummer alive that he knew was Bernard Purdie. And these are all coming from quotes from a book called The Big Beat by Max Weinberg that I happen to have a copy of them. Max Weinberg did a book of his favorite drummers back in the 80s, and it was in a very limited printing and pressing. And I found it in a bookstore in the probably the late 90s, early 2000s, somewhere. I can't remember where I found it, but I bought the book. And I've read the book. It's a great book. And there's a whole chapter on Roger Hawkins. And Roger Hawkins doesn't get the credit of some of the great studio drummers, but Jerry Wexler, the famous producer and one of the owners of Atlantic Records, basically said Roger Hawkins was the greatest drummer alive. That's why he used him a lot, and especially in the 60s and early 70s. So Roger passing away at 75 is a big deal. Roger hasn't been active in the drumming community, playing drums on sessions probably, I think, about 10 years. I think he retired. And a new crop of drummers came up in Muscle Shoals, because Muscle Shoals is still a recording scene. And all that to say is, Roger Hawkins had an effect on my playing. It's no doubt about it. I used to be a sub drummer for my friend Pat O'Donnell's band Boulevard East, and the guys in the band used to bust my chops. They weren't busting my chops, they actually were paying me a compliment. They would say, give me that fat back, Earl, give me that Roger Hawkins fat back when you're playing this tune. And it was all those kind of soul tunes that we did, because he played on things like Land of a Thousand Dances, you know, Wilson Pickett. He played on a lot of songs, a lot of music that you probably know, you've heard on the radio somewhere. And he was just such a great drummer. I mean, he played on Bob Seger's first album, and had a lot to do with Bob Seger even getting an album, because the Swampers basically gave Bob Seger studio time to get that album done, and they had points on his album and his career. And they, you know, that's part of the story of Bob Seger's career, is where he went to Muscle Shoals and did that album. And Roger Hawkins played drums on it. So, I mean, there's a lot of history in what this guy did. He's one of those drummers you should know about. And just from the fact of being Aretha's drummer on songs like Natural Woman, Respect, Think. I've done a cover of Think. He did Chain of Fools. I mean, he cut all those tracks. He was the drummer. So all I could say is great loss to the drumming community and losing Roger Hawkins. I have been doing a lot of drum covers of Aretha and a lot of those soul artists lately. I've been really going back to my roots and what type of a drummer I really am as a pocket drummer. And I have to attribute it to guys like Roger Hawkins, you know, and I never really give him the due I should when I'm talking about drummers that have influenced my playing. Jeff has been the guy I mention most, or you hear Steve Gadd licks in my playing. But when you think about 2 and 4 pocket drumming, you cannot not talk about Roger Hawkins. And Roger Hawkins has had an amazing, incredible effect on my playing for a long time. And even if I didn't realize it. So I just want to say rest in peace, Roger Hawkins. And we're going to go from here into Ask Earl Anything. So enjoy the show. Welcome to Ask Earl Anything. This is the show where your questions make the show, and if I don't have questions, I don't have a show. Now, for the last 2 months, I've been doing a new show called Hanging with the Hammer, which is where a lot of my questions go to these days. And I realize I'm not getting as many questions for Ask Earl Anything. And this week, I actually have 3 questions for Ask Earl Anything. So what I'm going to do, because doing a show every week is kind of wearing me down a little bit more than I thought it would. And this is the first weekend I'm really feeling like I need a little bit of a break. My grandkids wanted to go out to breakfast and a couple other things. And I just feel like I need a weekend to kind of regroup and do some things. So what I'm going to try to do is do Hanging with the Hammer most of the weekends, unless I'm traveling somewhere. And if I'm traveling somewhere, I'll try to have a Ask Earl Anything on that week to replace Hanging with the Hammer. So we're coming into the vacation season, so maybe it'll be a couple Ask Earl Anythings in a month and a couple Hanging with the Hammers. But I like the question and answer format, and I like when I take questions. I also like having guests on my show, and I've had some great guests this year on Hanging with the Hammer, and I want to have some more. I have a couple other friends out there I want to bring in, people that you've never met. I have some old YouTube drummer friends I'd like to bring in that brought me in early on. But my scheduling of things is not an exact science here. And even the guests I've had on the show have never been exact science. Like even the first couple of guests, like Mike Fasano and Tate and Berkey and Chadwick Perry, those were all very impromptu setups. Then I did a show with Kelly Cusimano, KM Ken Drum, and I did one with Eric at the Drum Attic, and I just did another one last week with Keith Scott, and I did Tate Berkey, where we did the special Chicago Danny Surfing drum kit hang, which was an immensely fun hang for me to do with Tate. So I've had a lot of fun doing the extra shows with friends and guests, and that's why I like doing that. But I've also had some question and answer shows, and that's where I think a lot of the questions and answers are going to these days. So I would appreciate it if those of you who like Ask Earl Anything continue to ask questions. And if you continue to do that, I'll have questions for when it comes time to do it. Or I'm going to start reserving some of the questions I get on how to do things in my videos, which I do get a lot, for Ask Earl Anything like I used to do back in the day. I have been answering them in the comments. It takes a lot to answer some of the questions in the comments. So today I'm going to do a quick Ask Earl Anything. I've just shouted out to a bunch of people, believe it or not, with Eric at the Drum Attic and Tate Berkey and Chadwick Perry, who's now double deuce drums, by the way, and KM Ken Drum and Keith Scott. So I've kind of hit and Mike Fasano doesn't have a channel, so I'm not really shouting out to his channel. But basically, those guys have all been on the show, and I've had a lot of fun with them all. Check out their channels, those that have channels. And those of you that are friends of mine that would like to be featured on my show and want to come in on a Saturday, let me know, and I'll try to work something out. Like I said to Keith Scott last week, the goal of the show is to encourage drummers and to encourage other drumming channels. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to make this immensely a hang with the most popular channels out there and bring them in. I'll let other guys do that kind of thing. If I get some more pro-level drummers to come in and hang with me, I love that. And if I can find some of my old friends that are doing it, that are out there, that might want to get a little exposure, I may try to drag them into a couple Hanging with the Hammers shows now that I've got some under my belt. So they might see it and say, hey, this is an opportunity to get some exposure. So I'm more of helping people get exposure than trying to get more exposure for my channel, so to speak. I really appreciate the community of guys that watch my drum covers faithfully and comment faithfully. So I will mention a few of those people. One is Paco Drums. I know Paco does not watch Ask Earl anything. I think he speaks Portuguese. I think he's from Portugal for some reason. I may be from Spain, but I think he's from Portugal. So check out Paco Drums. Paco has been a faithful viewer of my channel, so check his videos out. There's a whole bunch of people I'd like to really shout out to. There's a lot of new guys coming up and coming that are coming in the days ahead. So I will continue to try to shout out to the younger guys and the older guys that are getting into this that find me. I am really not as successful a channel as some out there. I got my own little thing that I do, and I love playing music, and I love putting out videos and having fun with it. So I just want to thank you all for watching my stuff. That's the main thing here. So let's talk a couple questions today. The first question comes from Lori Jones, who regularly comes to Hanging with the Hammer. Thank you, Lori. And Lori asked, I've been enjoying your covers. I really agree with your view on life. Okay, life is fragile and precious. Here's a quick question. Is it worth repairing cracked cymbals? Does it work? Well, that's a loaded question. I would say this about repairing cymbals. Whenever you put a drill or you start cutting and sawing a cymbal to take out the crack, you're going to change it. So as soon as you drill, you've started to change the cymbal. And I've had limited success at best with cymbals getting cracks and being able to fix them with drilling a hole. I have a Paiste traditional that I drilled holes and it's already spread past the hole where I drilled. So it doesn't really work is what I'm saying. I have another cymbal, a Sabian HH sound control crash ride. That's got a real small crack in it, but the cymbal still sounds like the cymbal, and it really is a pretty crash ride to have. And I've been using it in church occasionally on Sundays, and if I drill it, I'm done. It's over with. That cymbal will never sound the same again. So my recommendation is, if it's a small crack and it's a cymbal you can kind of like rotate out of your main cymbals and save it for those days you want to play it, then keep it that way and don't drill it. If it's a cymbal that's one of your main cymbals, you can't afford another cymbal, then drilling it and stopping the crack might help, but it will change the sound of the cymbal. And if you get to the point where you actually cut it out and round it off and bring it to like a metal guy to kind of do that, you will get some funky looking cymbals that could sound okay. It'll just sound different. And that's the thing. As soon as you start messing with the cymbals, you will start to find out that you have changed the sound of them and what made them beautiful. And that's what happened with the traditional. When I first drilled that hole, it changed things for it, and it never was even a good splat anymore. Now it's really kind of a terrible splat. So now it just goes, pff, doesn't really have any sound at all. I've tried to use it a couple times, couple videos. I drilled some holes for rivets, didn't really work. So my recommendation to you is, if it's a ride cymbal or something like a splash cymbal, just try to get out of your regular rotation, bring it in only when you really need it. Because splash cymbals, I've got a couple splashes that got cracks. Splash cymbals are so thin and so small, and you hit them so hard, you're probably not going to be able to fix that no matter what you do. I tried fixing, it was around the edge of the hole. I tried to fix one on an Evolution 7-inch HH splash I had, Dave Weckl splash, and that cymbal just isn't the same anymore. So it really depends on the size the cymbal's going to affect it too and what you use it for. Ride cymbals, I would say just leave it alone. Like this is an 18-inch crash ride, so it's really, if as long as it's not in my regular bashing cymbals, and I've got some great crash cymbals to bash, that's a delicate cymbal. So if I use it in a jazz scenario, it's going to be fine. If I have to put it in a Christian church rock scenario where I cracked it, by the way, then I'm going to have a problem with it. It's going to crack a lot quicker. So that's my idea for dealing with a cracked cymbal. Try not to if you can get away with it. All right, the second question comes from AR drummer Adam. He said, question, how much difference do you think bearing edges really make? Well, that's a great question. I think this came after he had reworked the bearing edges on some concert toms and put a bearing edge on the bottom drums, those Slingerland drums that he was reworking concert toms into double-headed drums. I will say the bearing edges are extremely important when it comes to two-headed drums. If you're going to try to put a bottom head on a concert tom and you don't do anything with the bearing edge, it's not going to sound very good. I have a 6.5 by 10 maple Gretsch tom that was a concert tom that I had converted to a double-headed tom. And I did the conversion, so I put the lugs on it. It's a 6-lug Gretsch 10-inch drum. Because when Gretsch made 10-inch drums in the late 70s, all of their concert toms, the smaller size concert toms, like the 10, was a 6-lug drum. Now, Gretsch is known for 5-lug drums for its 12-inch toms and its 10-inch toms. So it's kind of an anomaly to have a 6-lug 10-inch tom, but I do, because it was a concert tom. It had a triple flange rim on it. So when I got it, I immediately wanted to put a bottom head on it. It had that short gad-looking 10-inch tom. I had 10, 12, 14. And I use that very often. I've used it in church. But the reason I can use it now, and I really couldn't use it back in the day when I first did it, was because of the bearing edge. And I guess it's about 18 years ago when I first moved down here to Florida, I went to Resurrection Drums in Hollandale Beach. And what happened was I had them do bearing edges on that particular drum. And when they did it, they were charging about $1.50 an inch. So it cost me $30 for the bearing edges on a 10-inch tom. But by them putting the 45 bearing edge on that drum came alive, and it actually sounds pretty good. Now, I do think different types of bearing edges give different types of sounds, and a 45 is not necessarily what you want to put on a Gretsch normally. But for a 10-inch tom, it bites through a little bit. It actually sounds good. Gretsch normally has a 30 roundover bearing edge, which is kind of a vintage bearing edge. And I think it does, Gretsch drums that got 45s or recut bearing edges sound great, but they're more modern sounding than the old 30 roundovers. So what you do with your bearing edge is also going to affect the sound of it. I think you get a fatter sound with the 30 roundover. The old Ludwig drums had a roundover bearing edge too. We've really got into this 45 crisp bearing edge thing back in the 80s and 90s. That's when they started doing it. Companies like Earl, all the companies started doing it. Even Gretsch started putting a slightly more straighter edge on it for a while on their US drums. They weren't calling them USA Customs back then. This is before they had the China line of or Taiwan line of Renown and Catalina and all that. So Gretsch drums were just Gretsch drums made in the US. They didn't make a lot of drums back then either. Even today, they don't make a lot of drums in the United States. Most of their drums are made overseas and sold from the Renown series and the Catalina series. So Gretsch drums made in the US have a different thing. Of course, now there's the Brooklyn series, and there's a couple other USA-made drums. Maybe they're making more drums, but for the longest time, they weren't making a lot of the USA Customs. They weren't making a lot of drums each month. But that's another story for another time. Bearing edges do affect the sound of the drums. That's going back to the original question. I think it's really important to have a good bearing edge. If you don't have a good bearing edge, your head's not going to sit on the drum properly. you are going to have tuning problems and other issues. Just as much as important as that bearing edge is having good rims that are not out of round either. Out of round rims will make it very hard to tune a drum. So make sure your rims are in round. Even die cast rims can go out of round. So make sure your rims are in round and they're rounded. Make sure your bearing edges are good, and then do your best job of tuning it, and you're probably not going to have a problem. And most decent drums, you can get, if it's got a round shell, decent bearing edge, decent rims, you can get a decent sound out of most drums. That's why I'm not real particular about the drums in a church I play. I'm more particular about having a good snare, and even the kick drum, you can make sound what you need to get out of something usually, but the snare has got to have a certain sound, and that's where you really see it, bearing edges, is if the snare is not right. That if you don't have the right bearing edges on a snare drum, it can really affect the sound of that drum. And the other thing is on a snare drum is the snare bed. Having a bed on a wood drum is really important. And having some kind of a bed on those metal drums is important too. And you'll find in the older drums, you'll see a more pronounced bed on the metal drums. But all wood drums should have some kind of a snare bed in there, and that's important too. So there's a lot there that makes a drum sound the way it sounds. But yeah, I think they're very important, Adam. So thanks for the question. The last question comes from Windsurf03. And Windsurf03 said, his name is Brooke, by the way. He said, my name's Brooke. He says, do you have a trick? Here's what he said. He said, hi, Earl. When you do a cover, are you reading the music while playing? And do you have a trick for memorizing fills? I repeat to the point of becoming disheartened. Thanks for your advice and appreciate your knowledge, Brooke. So the reason why I saved this question, because I did kind of answer him back. He probably won't watch this to find the answer out. I already kind of gave him a little piece of it, but I'm going to give you guys a little piece of the answer. The truth of the matter is, if I have to learn a fill because the fill is integral to the song, when I'm doing covers, there are certain fills that are integral to the song. I will try to learn them to the best I can. But then there's the other side of that other piece, where once I start learning things, then I start hearing other things. And what a lot of guys ask me, are you reading as you're playing your covers? The answer is no, I don't read while I'm playing covers. What I'm doing is listening. And a lot of times I will be listening to the original drummer, at least for part of the time I'm tracking. Every once in a while I'll get to a point where I'll go, let's turn the other drummer off and just leave the click on. And that's always great when I do that. And then if any of my fills come out as being anywhere near what the other drummer did, it's probably because that's the right fill to play in that spot. You know, there are fills that are the right fills to play. And I guess after years and years of experience, I know the right fills to play. That's the key. I break things down when I do drum covers to the lowest common denominator, so that I can find the bottom line how to approach a song. I had another guy ask me a question. I'm not going to reference him. He asked me the question today. It was for that song Personally, which is kind of funky. It's a Carla Bonoff song. And he was asking me, well, how do you play that groove? How do you play that groove? Well, first off, the reason why I can pick that groove up pretty quick is because it's pretty much standard groove. It's 1 and 3 on the bass drum for the most part. It gets embellished, but it's 1 and 3 on the bass drum, 2 and 4 on the snare drum. And the hi-hat part is this kind of galloping hi-hat part, you know. 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and so it's. And that's pretty much the part. Now, you start listening to the bass player, you start grooving in there, and you're locking in, and all of a sudden you might put in you might throw one of those in, you know. But for the most part, the song is. You know, every once in a while it goes to the 4 on the tom. You know, so how can I learn that song so quickly and pick that up so quickly? It's years of experience, number one. and breaking it down to the least common denominator, and then not getting hung up and having to play it exact. That's how I get away with that. I actually think, well, what fits this music I'm hearing? So I start listening to the other musicians more than the drummer, and then my groove starts to come in. And that's how I lock in. Because what I'm doing is I'm trying to lock in strongly with where the song is going and what's going on in the song. So I'm listening to the other musicians, not the other drummer necessarily. So I don't get hung up on the fills. But if it's a fill that has to be played, sometimes you have to learn it. But I usually find that when you're waiting for that fill to come in, that really cool fill you want to play, a lot of times you screw it up because you're so over anticipating when that comes in. So I'm usually better off on drum covers where I'm not worrying about fills and I'm playing what I feel is the right fill for the part coming in. And 9 times out of 10, it's pretty close to what the original artist played. Just might be slightly different. It's the cooler ones that get lost because I won't try to be exact on some of those that are really kind of outside my playing even. Sometimes something's outside my playing, but I can play the whole song, but that one fill that he does is just, it's not going to happen. So what do? I kind of find what works for me and I play through it. So really what I'm doing in drum covers is I'm listening to the music. And by the way, this is what you do on a gig. You listen to the musicians, you lock in with the music, and you play what's appropriate. And what's important is you're locked in with the music, you're locked in with the musicians, and you're not letting the groove go anywhere. The fills aren't that important. Matter of fact, sometimes you can get away with doing a song without playing a fill in it, and nobody would notice that you didn't play a fill. Problem with drummers is drummers like playing fills. That's what we call the cool stuff. I did a cover of a song called Green Onions recently. It's Booker T and the MGs. It's boom, boom, ba doom, 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 doom. This is the groove of the song. And the part is there's an organ and there's the guitar. Boom, da da doo, da ba boom, da da dee, da ba doo, da ba dee, da ba doo, da ba dee. So the natural feeling of the song is to do this. You can shuffle it. But Al Jackson Jr. didn't shuffle it. He just kept it right there. Boom, down, ba ding, ba ba boom. And Donald Duck Dunn's playing the bass part and he's playing it boom, 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 boom. The song is that simple. It doesn't require a fill. Ba da, ba doo, ba da doo da. Bum ba ba doo da. Ba doom ba da doo da. The ba da. And every once in a while you put a little tap to make it a little bit more interesting. The point is, some songs don't require fills. But we want to put them in because we're drummers. We want to show that we can play a fill. So the other thing about playing music is knowing when to play a fill. So I don't get hung up on fills because for me, I want what comes out naturally, what feels natural and right. And every once in a while, there's a song that requires the fill must be the fill. I get it. I try to give you that when it's right. But sometimes the fill can be what I want the fill to be. And when that's the case, I put them in too. And that's what makes things fun. So keep that in mind when you're doing drum covers, is to not get too hung up on the fills and to get more hung up on making the groove sit and sound right. And could I read and do it? I have covers where I've read and I do it. A lot of my I have a bunch of jazz big band covers which got road maps. But I have one cover, Cult of Personality. I did that a while back, over a year ago. And that particular song, I couldn't figure out one section of it. It was this 3/4 thing. And I put the chart up there and I had that there the whole time I was playing that cover. It was off to the side. And I didn't look at it for very much, but those 3/4 things, every once in a while I look over, make sure I was following the drop in of the 3/4 bars. It was helpful. Having a chart's helpful. But even that, I didn't try to play everything exact. I just tried to play what was on the music to help me get through it. But for the most part, I don't chart out anything. I just play along with what I'm listening to. And a lot of times my covers are made within 15 minutes of me sitting down to play it for the first time. It doesn't take very long to play Green Onions when you've heard it a billion times, and when you played it when you're in high school, it comes back to you. Oh, this is just a blues, and it's just a swing thing, and it just locks in. So that's what I did with it. And I cut that tune, both versions, because there's two versions. There's one I jazzed up a little more. I cut both of them in 20 minutes, both, with the little fill thing in the middle at the end of it. You know, I think there were like 4 or 5 passes. It's only a 2-minute song, so it really didn't take very long to do it. That's the point I'm trying to get at. When I'm making covers, I'm having fun. I'm locking in with the music. I'm grooving with the music, and for the most part, I'm not sweating the fills, because the fills I play are appropriate fills for the songs from playing music for as long as I've been playing music. So, I actually find it harder to play modern songs where it's very contrived drum parts and each section's got a different thing happening, and it doesn't really make sense musically to me. They're just, let's do a different thing. And that's what happens a lot in church music. You'll go from playing nothing to playing dum, dum. You play some tribal thing on the toms, and then the next time you do a tribal thing on the toms with this like kind of odd accent and a 4, you know. And then you'll go back, and then you'll go into a groove, and then you'll go to a build, and then you'll go to a 4 on the floor, and then you'll go back to the tribal thing, and then you'll have a breakdown. And the music's like all over the place, and the drums lead the music. And I do that in church, so I know how to do it. It's just not as much fun as getting a tune like Green Onions on there and just going boom, just going ba ba boo da da ba ba da doo da da ba ba da boo da. It just sits there, They're just playing along, grooving together, rocking out, man. So that's how I make drum covers. I don't use music, and that's how I get through the fills. It's just from years of playing it and knowing what's musically appropriate. And I think listening is a big part of that too. And that's a whole nother topic. We can go on for hours and hours and hours, which I do all the time. Thank you all for watching Ask Earl Anything. This is the show where your questions make the show. If I don't have questions, I don't have a show. I thank you all for hanging with me on Hanging with the Hammer. I thank you, all my friends that have been on my Hanging with the Hammer show. And I just want to say thanks for watching. Have a great Saturday. Take care. Bye.